Aaron, you started playing music, piano, classical piano, at the age of 7. Did you have any prior musical background before you started taking lesson?
Well, one of my earliest musical influences probably was my grandfather, who played trombone and piano, and he oftentimes would come over to my parents' house and just play tunes like standards on the piano, and I'd watch him. And I think I always had an interest in music. I always enjoyed the sound of music. My mother told me one time when I was just a toddler, maybe 3 years old, I was at some kind of event that they had took me to, and they sat me down in front of the band, and I was completely quiet and sort of transfixed on the music on the band that was playing. I think I was really lucky in the fact that I had a lot of music uh, around the house. My parents had a CD collection, some records. My grandfather played, as I mentioned, and also we went to church every Sunday, and so I heard music in church. So I was just exposed to a lot of music from an early age.
Mm. And when you started playing piano, was it the classical because the curriculum and the syllabus at the time that was available happened to be the classical and the local teachers were teaching classical, or how did it come about?
Well, my mother knew that I was interested in the piano, and there was a community music school at it's a Lutheran university in Columbus called Capital University, and so she enrolled me in the community music school with a lady by the name of Joanne Hall, and she started me off on what probably every pianist starts off with, Czerny and Hannon, and then some Anna Magdalena Bach, and these kinds of things. So um, I think from that point, I really became more interested in classical music just because I liked the sound of it. For example, my uh, parents had a box set of J.S. Bach's Brandenburg Concerti, and I really played that to death. I really love the sound of Bach, and I'm still such just like many people, a big fan of his music. So I think just after I got started with playing and learning how to play piano, I just became more interested in classical music and sort of the wide variety of sound that you could get out of an orchestra, and the virtuosity of certain types of writing composers. So I think it just was a natural love affair, if you will.
You were born in Columbus, Ohio, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so the early influences musical comes from that sphere. And would you say the jazz scene was big at that time and in your town?
Definitely. I mean, we had a jazz scene in Columbus that was quite active. In fact, my grandfather would sit in at this jam session that was not too far from where I lived. And it was like a Saturday brunch jam session with a lot of the older musicians. And I remember one guy, and this is before I really got involved in playing jazz or really interested in jazz, but there was a drummer. His name was Billy Brown, and he would always encourage me to come up. He knew I had started playing piano, and he always encouraged me to come up and play with the band. And I was always very nervous to do that because I didn't really know anything about that language at all at that time, and so he would always encourage me, and I would politely decline. And yeah, he was a really cool guy, very encouraging. I just remember the atmosphere of that brunch, and a lot of older black people uh, having eggs. It was called jazz and eggs, having eggs and bacon, and having brunch or whatever they're eating, and listening to the music, and um, it was great. It was a great atmosphere. I was really fortunate to be a part of something like that at a early age, or be exposed to something like that, an environment like that. Then as I got more interested in playing jazz in my teenage years, there were jam sessions, and my high school band director Todd Stoll, um, I auditioned for his band. It was actually not at my high school. It was a sort of like a regional high school band called the Columbus Youth Jazz Orchestra, and I think that's really where I cut my teeth, as we say, in playing jazz and ensembles, because prior to that I hadn't really much experience playing in a jazz band, except for a few jam sessions here or there.
Mm. You went to the Center for Creative Practices Interlochen and in
I went
Michigan.
to Interlochen. Yeah, I went to Interlochen in around 1999, I think 98, 99, somewhere in there. And I went for classical piano, and I heard this young kid from Kyrgyzstan by the name of Eldar Jangirov. You might have heard of him. He goes by the name Eldar. And he immigrated from Kyrgyzstan, and I think his family ended up being based in Kansas City, Missouri. And so he was there for a few summers, and he was sort of like the star of the camp. He was about 10 or 11 years old. He was very young. He's younger than me. And he was just a virtuoso. He had a lot of language under his fingers, especially with Oscar Peterson. I mean, he could play anything. And so I heard him, and I was very inspired by it. I said, I'd love to really try to improve my understanding of jazz and jazz piano. So I think I always try to credit him to some extent, besides my grandfather, for really getting me more interested in playing, this art form. Because a lot of times I guess I associated with jazz. I associated jazz with people who were in their, 70s and 80s. I didn't really think that people, as certainly as young as Eldar, were really interested in digging it.
Mm. Was this shortly after this you went to Juilliard?
I went to Juilliard 2000, well, it was, yeah, a few years after that. 2003 is when I started Juilliard, the jazz studies program. It was, because of Todd. I mentioned my high school band director. He had um, a friendly relationship with Wynton Marsalis, and Wynton he heard me. I think the first time he might have heard me was maybe at a jam session in Columbus. He did a master class in Columbus at some point around 2001, 2002. And so Wynton had heard me, and I think he recognized that I was really interested in stride piano. Um, James P. Johnson, Willie the Lion Smith, Fats Waller, and I still love them. I really love that style of piano playing. So Winton had heard me, and he encouraged me to try to apply for the Juilliard program. And yeah, I started in 2003. I did a brief tour, funny enough, with Winton with a septet just before that, and that was really quite an experience. And then I went to a conservatory, and I was there for 4 years.
Well, I'm sure it's a well-rounded musical program, but there probably will be few subjects that you really found practical and you enjoyed them the most. What subjects did you enjoy the most that even at this point you use their skills every day?
Well, I tell you one class I enjoyed was ensemble class. Well, I don't. I'll go as far as saying that the skill sets that I learned in ensemble class, small ensemble especially, are so useful and important today. Ben Wolf was a bass player. You might have heard of him. He's played with Harry Connick Jr. He played with Wynton for a little bit. He's played with a lot of people, Benny Green. one of the things he always told me, he said, put yourself last on the bandstand, and it's, if you have four musicians in a band, it's four equal parts. If you have eight musicians, eight equal parts. Of course, there's a leader typically that directs, gives the overall artistic vision. However, what's important is that everyone sounds like an ensemble, and is really empathetic and caring about making each other sound better. And it's so easy in the art form of jazz to become very myopic, or meaning, very self-centered. And I think it's just essential, and Ben taught me this, to really uh, approach it with a certain kind of approach the music with a certain kind of selflessness. Um, so I learned quite a bit from Ben. Um, I'm trying to think of some other courses that just stick out, classes that stick out. I mean, I had a lot of fun. One of the great things about Juilliard at that time, I imagine it's still like this, but they really encouraged collaborations, not just with people in one's own department, but also in other divisions. So, people in the dance division, people in the drama division, and I really um, formed a core group of friends with whom I still keep in touch from those experiences and collaborating with different disciplines.
Well, your teachers were at the time you had Kenny Barron, you had Oxana, Yablonskaya, and Eric Reed. They all have incredible amount of work behind them. They have been working since very early age. I mean, you can start playing 3 years old, 5 years old, and it goes on. And Eldar as well, and yourself at a very young age. Uh, what were the classes or expectations? What were your expectations when you were into classes with these giants? What it is that you wanted to get out of them?
Well, I think I my first teacher actually was Kenny Barron, and I think I actually would have benefited more from him as an older musician. I started with him right, when I got there, so I was 17. I hadn't even turned 18 yet. We would just play duets, which was a treat. Playing duet with Kenny Barron. It's like, I would give my left leg to do that now. Having the opportunity to do that. But yeah, for Mr. Barron, for sure, I'd say really talked about accompaniment, and how important that was. Um, he was like, yeah, we got to really work on your comping a bit more, and we had spent a good amount of time on comping in the lessons. Eric was much more. Um, I think he was much more specific. Eric was. I mean, I feel like he understood where I was coming from, and we have similar musical approaches in many respects, and also very different ones as well. But I think Eric, he recognized really what I needed to work on and my weaknesses. Like we spent an entire semester on Chick Corea, which is someone he knew that I hadn't really listened to up to that point. He was such an encyclopedia, and still is an encyclopedia for jazz. I mean, he's so knowledgeable, and he's a great communicator too, great teacher. Oksana was amazing because she understood that even though I wasn't a classical music major, she understood that I wanted to continue to explore the realms of classical music, um, even with the limited time I had. All my focus being on jazz piano, and everything that went along with the courses. Uh, so she spent every week with me. Well, we read through different pieces. She asked me to prepare some pieces quite frequently. I remember I played some Rachmaninoff one time, which was someone I had not up until that point really played. I mean, I knew some of his music, especially his piano concerti, um, but I never performed any of that, and she's an expert at that, and she had me come in with the preludes, and prepared some of those. And even though, and I wasn't nearly at the level that a lot of the musicians who came in as majors for the classical music department, she took the time to really uh, mold my sound and my approach, my own vision within the realm of piano. And we still keep in touch. She lives in Israel now. We keep in touch quite a bit. I remember when I played Concerto in F by Gershwin for the New York Philharmonic about 4 years ago. I immediately called her when I found out I was going to do it, and I said, "I need to go see you. I really need to be prepared for this." And I went to see her. I was on tour in Europe, and at the end of the tour, I went to Spain, where she was living at the time. And I went to Spain, and I spent about 4 or 5 days just playing two pianos and going over things with her. And yeah, she's a beautiful woman. Yeah.
Well, now when you're transferring from being a student to a position being an educator, what would you say is the basic studying material in terms of textbooks that every student and a teacher should have in your personal library at home?
Oh, that's very simple. Records. Records. That's a textbook. I mean, there are many, there are various treatises on jazz piano, and I mean, I know I have the Mark Levine book. It's called Jazz Piano. A lot of people reference that and talk about that. Um, when it comes to arranging, I forgot the author is sitting over there. Just jazz arranging book. I haven't opened it in years. It's maybe it's Bill Dobbins' book on jazz arranging. He teaches at Eastman. I mean, there are a lot of texts, and many of them are very helpful. Jeff Patton has a really great book on comping. Um, it's quite useful. But I think at the very end of the day, I mean, what we have that European classical music um, doesn't have uh, is recordings. We have, I mean, recordings by the source. We want to hear Louis Armstrong, we can hear that. We want to hear Duke Ellington, we can hear it. We can hear that language in a way we can't do with Beethoven or Mozart. Um, so I think it's essential to just listen, 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 understanding and cross referencing the material, sort of the lineage, if you will, influences that people had. Um, I think, yeah, the recordings are really the source, and
Mm.
then taking what you hear and then adapting that to your own unique style and approach and language. But yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Just listening.
When you travel and you meet a lot of young musicians and people look up to you and they ask you questions and you give master classes and private lessons, uh, what would you say are common mistakes or false assumptions when they're young musicians? What do you think stands out that, you know, needed to be addressed at early stages?
That they'll be famous playing jazz. No, I mean, in all seriousness, I tell you what, with this pandemic and everything, I think it's really brought a lot of things to light. And even though, I'm slightly joking, but I'm also not, because I know a lot of students put everything, uh, it's really all in when it comes to jazz. Everything is about jazz, jazz, jazz. It's almost like it's a religion, and there's beauty to that, because you really one's dedicating themselves to uh, this art form for life. But I think it's also important, in addition to that, to have other interests, to be able to not only talk about your interest in jazz music, but also your interest in other topics. Could be philosophy. It could be sports. It could be cooking, um, politics, whatever. I think that's critical to be well rounded, because of one thing the pandemic has taught is any of this can just stop at any second. Uh, and I think it's important for people to. I really want to say a backup plan, because I don't really like that term, because it's assuming that something isn't going to work out and you're going to you find something else to do. But I also think it's important to have alternatives or creative methods that are sort of outside of the norm, in case uh, things don't go as planned. And nobody saw this pandemic coming. And everybody from the first year student at a conservatory to Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea and Charles Lloyd, these people, great jazz legends, they can't perform because of the restrictions around performing. So I think it's just important to be well rounded and not put all of your eggs in one basket. I mean, be dedicated. Jazz is a vocation for sure, but also uh, have other interests and other passions if it's possible.
Hmm. You have somehow answered even my following question, and that was, what advice would you give to students that are graduating from a school when they are starting out musicians and they're trying to start up their career? Uh, what would be one or maybe one piece of advice to go by?
I think especially for the young people, I know who are really involved with social media, and in a way, it's a blessing, especially now with everyone being more or less locked down at home. Um, I think it can be a useful tool. On the other hand, the internet, Instagram, Facebook, all these platforms will never replace uh, real human contact and real human connection. And I think it's important, as we kind of get out of this stage in our lives, is to sort of reevaluate the importance of real human contact in person, and um, striking a balance of how to use the communication tools that we have available, um, using them effectively, but remember that this is a real uh, this is a way of communicating, of expressing something that cannot be expressed in words. And there's nothing like experiencing live music. And what I'm kind of noticing, uh, I think in recent months, this sort of inundation of, and again, it's partially or even a big part because of the situation we're in, but sort of a focus on um, like an emphasis on getting a social media following and all that. And I guess that it does have some importance, but at the end of the day, you know, you can't really have a true conversation and connection over the internet, and get people's reactions instantaneously, and being able to read a room when you're in a club or in a venue. And you can get a kind of a sense where the audience is at, or if they're along with they're along on the journey with you. And I think young musicians especially, I think it's important to really kind of tune into that as we get out of this and they have opportunities to perform in person, because That's what's so special about this music, especially playing with other people in the bandstand. Again, it is a form of communication and a form of intimacy.
Mm. Aaron, you're 35 years old, and this is a that's very, very short time for having piano skills such as you have. Because when you play, I can hear blues and gospel, I can hear a classical, and I can hear something that is recognizable as your own original voice. Uh, what is it right now, apart from performing with other musicians? What is it that you're looking forward to? Because you obviously are a person that is driven by a process, and you put some goals in front of yourself. What is it you're looking forward to piano playing wise?
Well, piano playing wise, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I've been thinking about that quite a bit over the last few months. What do I want to uh, what do I want to do here in the future? So honestly, I couldn't answer that for you right now. I think more my goals actually have been outside of music recently. Um, uh, for example, I've had a lifelong love of aviation, and so uh, I got a commercial airplane license. Um, and again, I'm not going to fly for an airline, but it's just a stepping stone actually for me to maybe do some teaching in aviation and flight instruct. So that's sort of one of my goals in the next year to get my flight instructor certificate. And that's only because I have a love for aviation and I want to continue doing that while also refining my skills through teaching. Um, I, I can't wait to travel again. I want to go to Europe. I love languages. I took a German course over the last few months with the Goethe Institute, and um, I would want to travel to Germany or to a German speaking country and practice maybe a little bit. I think learning a language, any foreign language, is very important, especially for Americans. A lot of us we really don't speak fluently more than one language, our native language, English. So that's been a goal of mine. What else? I will say from a musical standpoint, doing more composition. Haven't really been doing that much lately, but every day I've been coming up with just maybe a motif here or there, and playing around with it and see where it leads me. It might not lead me anywhere. In fact, most of the time it doesn't lead me anywhere. Um, I think being more consistent with my methods of creating music, and not just playing piano, but actually composing. So, I mean, there are a lot of options at my disposal right now because there's nothing but time. I don't have anywhere to be necessarily.
Ernie, you're an incredibly interesting person. When I read about uh, your skills and having a pilot's license, I think I remember that I saw your picture either on Facebook or in a magazine when you were actually sitting like in a small airplane. Uh,
Oh,
a- and I saw, I think Ari Honig also likes flying, and I'm impressed because the skills, how far away from piano playing that is, and also that's a long term studying, right? That's not a matter of 1 year achieving everything you've achieved in your flying studies.
well, it's actually possible to get your pilot's license in a year if you're committed enough. Definitely, just like with piano, I've been flying from a young age, not as young as 7, but about 14 is when I started flying. And my dad flew as a hobby. I was always around aviation with him, and it's just been a lifelong passion in addition to music. And it's really not that much different from music. I mean, they say that musicians can make very good pilots because we're used to multitasking, you know, uh, and that's a lot of what you do in flying. you're really doing many different things at once. Um, so yeah, it's just it's definitely been something that I want to continue to pursue and to refine my skills and to become better. And just like music, I mean, you never master music and you never master aviation. There's always something you don't know, something you can learn.